After 30 years, how would you assess Kazakhstan's policy to renounce its nuclear weapon, especially in the global climate when we hear nuclear rhetoric more and more frequent? What would be your advice to the world community, especially drawing upon your experience working with Kazakh government?
So Kazakhstan's decision to renounce nuclear weapons and biological weapons, all weapons of mass destruction, was the key to 30 years of prosperity and peace and security in Kazakhstan. It was the wisest decision possible, and we worked very closely, my government in the United States, together with Kazakhstan as partners on this, and dealt with the legacy of weapons of mass destruction that had been left on the territory of Kazakhstan from the Soviet times.
Welcome to the Astana Times YouTube channel. Today we're meeting with Andy Weber, Senior Fellow at Council on Strategic Risks. Mr. Weber's career has been dedicated to countering nuclear, biological, and chemical threats. Mr. Weber, thank you very much for meeting with us. I really appreciate it. I know that you worked as part of the Obama's administration. You served the US government, you worked at the Georgetown University, but there's a very interesting part of your biography. I think you were witnessing firsthand Kazakhstan's first step towards its nuclear-free future. Project Sapphire was part of that. It's celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. I just wanted to know that Project Sapphire involved the removal of 600 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium into safe storage. Can you walk us through that project, the significance of that project, and its impact on global and regional security?
Wow. Well, first of all, it's so great to be back in Kazakhstan. I lived in Almaty for a couple of years, right after independence, from 1993 until 1995. And I was there when the decision was made for Kazakhstan to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear weapons state. And it was an incredible, historic experience. Vice President Gore was here for that day. It was December 13th in 1993. And I was a first secretary at the very new Embassy of the United States in Almaty, the old capital. And it was the best several years of my life, of my career. And so it's wonderful to be back. So shortly after my arrival in Kazakhstan in the summer of 1993, I was approached by actually my automobile mechanic, Slava, who asked me if I'd be interested in buying some uranium.
Wow. And
it was a crazy time in history. And of course, there were a lot of scams going on at the time, and I was very skeptical, but I said, well, I'd like to learn more details. And that led eventually to an introduction to a man named Vitaly Mete, who was director of the Ulbinsky Metallurgical Factory. And we became friends, and over time, I got to know him very well. He invited me up to Ust-Kamenogorsk on a hunting trip in the fall of 1993. And we talked about the possibility of the United States perhaps purchasing uranium, but we had to know the details. Was it low enriched uranium? Because we knew at the time that the factory did produce low enriched uranium fuel pellets for the nuclear power industry, but we had no information that there was weapons grade uranium at the plant. And then one day I was working at the original American Embassy on 99 Formanova Street, and my driver and mechanic, Slava, came to the embassy and said, there's somebody who wants to meet you. And so I hopped in the car and we drove off to a site outside of Almaty, and I met Vitaly Mete, and we had a really good conversation, got to know him, and this led to a series of events. In December of 1993, I was visited again by Slava at the embassy, and he said, "Andy, somebody wants to see you." And I had been sort of pressing for more details about the potential stockpile of uranium at the Ulba plant. And Slava drove me to a microrayon outside of Almaty, to an apartment complex, and there was an office. It was a small company called Bars, or Snow Leopard, that was selling night vision goggles and scopes for hunting for sportsmen. And I spoke with a former KGB border guard colonel, Korbater, and he said, "Andy, let's take a walk." And it was a snowy day, an early winter that year, and we went out into the courtyard, and we're walking and talking, and he said, "Andy, Vitaly has a message he wanted me to pass to you." And I said, "Okay, great, what is it?" And he said, "Here." And he handed me a very small piece of paper folded in half. And I kept walking, and I casually glanced down at the paper, and it said, U-235, 600 kg, 90%. And I folded it back, and I remember putting it in my pocket, and I just gulped, thinking, oh my God, if this is true, that's enough weapons grade uranium for a couple dozen nuclear bombs. And later that day, I went back to the embassy and reported this to Washington. There was, of course, a lot of skepticism that this was even possible. But eventually it checked out.
So it was like kind of a spy story from what you were saying, a very scary one. It's about 24 Hiroshima-sized bombs, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and so we eventually were able to have a more official discussion with the government about the potential of this highly enriched uranium being stored at the Ulba plant. And first President Nazarbayev visited President Clinton in Washington in early February of 1994, and I was part of that visit. And we met in Blair House, where the first president was staying, and had a very discreet meeting that wasn't on the public schedule up in his personal quarters where he was staying. And part of the discussion was about the Ulba factory and the possibility that this uranium was there. And so we asked his permission for me and a technical expert to visit the plant secretly to verify that this uranium was there and the enrichment level and the quantity. And he said yes. He turned to his general and said, make it happen. And so in early March, an expert from Oak Ridge National Laboratory came out to Almaty. His name was Elwood Gift. And together, with an escort from the government, we flew up to Usk-Kamenogorsk in an Antonov 12 aircraft, turboprop aircraft, and were met by Vitaly Mete, and then we had a nice dinner. The next day, we visited the plant. He gave us a briefing, and then he took us to the vault, to this building that was protected by a woman from the militia who was armed with a 9mm Makarov pistol. And they opened the wooden doors, and there was sort of a metal barred door, and he asked for the key, and it was protected by a good padlock. It was open, and the doors were open. We went into this big room with almost like a dirt floor, and there was a platform with concrete about this high off the ground that was covered with plywood, and across this platform there were these stainless steel buckets, and they were spread apart in order to avoid reaching a critical mass, because if you have too much highly enriched uranium in one place, it can go critical, and that's very dangerous. It would release a lot of radiation. And so we took samples. We randomly picked, this bucket and that bucket, and opened them up, and each one had a label saying what was inside, and then we were able to verify that what was on the labels was actually true. And we did some assays in the laboratory at the plant and confirmed the enrichment level. We also took some samples, which eventually made their way back to the United States to confirm that in our laboratories. And then we reported this back to Washington, and the alarms went off. And that's when Washington went into high gear. We started a process of planning and negotiating with the government of Kazakhstan this secret project to package safely and transport to the United States 600 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium. And it took months to plan. It
took almost a week to transport all of that to, I think, Delaware?
Yeah, it took about 6 weeks.
I'm sorry, yeah.
To package the material and put them into containers that were certified for the transport of fissile materials. We had them all packaged and then loaded onto these old, Soviet-era trucks. And that's when the material was most at risk, when it was mobile. And we kept extreme secrecy about this project because our biggest fear was that a terrorist group or a criminal group could intercept one of the trucks while it was moving through the town. So there was one very cold night. It was snowing a little bit, and there was black ice on the roads. And that was the night that we decided, and I was the only American on the convoy, together with the security team from the government of Kazakhstan. We drove the trucks in a convoy from the factory to the airport, and the trucks were sliding on the ice. And I remember thinking, if one of them goes off the bridge into the Irtysh River, I'd hate to have to report back to Washington.
And the area would be contaminated too, right?
Well, the material was packaged, so contamination wasn't the concern. The concern was that this was weapons-usable material, that a country like Iran, that was seeking nuclear weapons at the time, could be handed material. Osama bin Laden was starting to be active at that time in Afghanistan. And countries like Libya had been approaching the government of Kazakhstan asking for weapons and materials, and the proliferation risk was very, very serious at that time.
Can you tell us, I know that many people, when they will hear 24 or a couple of dozen of Hiroshima-sized bombs, it takes you a little bit back, like you have to really imagine the consequences for the planet. What's the significance of that in terms of regional security, global security, and the role of Kazakhstan in voluntarily giving up that nuclear weapon?
It was, and Kazakhstan was well compensated for this. And we provided a lot of assistance to deal with the environmental and health aspects of the Soviet testing at the polygon at Kurchatov near Semipalatinsk. Actually, this was, the first time ever that there was such a project where material that could be used by a terrorist group or a rogue state that would give them a shortcut to developing nuclear weapons like the ones the United States dropped on Japan to end World War II. This much material was a huge security threat to the region, to the world, and we flew it back on military transport aircraft to Dover, Delaware, and then overland by a secure convoy to Tennessee, where it was blended down and used for the nuclear power industry. So peaceful use, never ever be used in weapons. And this started a series of projects that went on for decades to identify countries that had weapons usable nuclear materials, fissile material, highly enriched uranium, in some cases plutonium, and to secure that and to send it either back to Russia where it originated or to the United States in a few cases, to have it taken off the potential for diversion, taken off the market permanently as part of our non-proliferation effort. And we had, President Obama and I served in his administration as an Assistant Secretary of Defense, started a series of nuclear security summits. And in 2012, he and President Nazarbayev and then President Medvedev announced another project that sort of grew out of this original Project Sapphire. It led to decades of close cooperation on nuclear non-proliferation, dismantling the world's largest biological weapons factory at Stepnogorsk was another project that we did together with Kazakhstan. It was part of a global effort to reduce the risk of these horrific nuclear weapons, which haven't been used for almost 75 years, and we hope that they will never, ever be used.
At the time when Project Sapphire took place, diplomatic relationships between Kazakhstan and the United States were only 2 years old. And many experts say that trust and confidence in your partner was key. In your opinion, how diplomatic relationship between two countries contribute when solving sensitive issues involving Project Sapphire?
I think that was absolutely true, that the relationships and the trust that developed between our countries, between our officials, between our embassy staff and our counterparts in the government of Kazakhstan, that ability to work together on a secret project, which was publicly announced after it was completed and the material was safely stored at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It brought our countries much, much closer together, and we built on that trust. Later in 1994, or in June of 1995, with the permission of the government of Kazakhstan, and actually President Tokayev was foreign minister at the time and was directly involved in this decision. We met with him in his office to discuss it. The government arranged for us to secretly visit the world's largest biological weapons factory in Stepnogorsk. It was a facility that the Soviet Union built in the 1980s after the Biological Weapons Convention prohibiting biological weapons had entered into force. And it was capable of producing 300 metric tons of anthrax during a wartime mobilization period of about 8 months. And that facility, if you were to go there today, is completely gone. It's a green field. It was a multi-year project where we safely, environmentally, soundly destroyed that facility that can never again be used to produce biological weapons. So that's the kind of close cooperation that was possible. More recently, the International Atomic Energy Agency fuel bank for low-enriched uranium for the power sector with an international UN flag is now at Uskamenogorsk, and you know, the reason for that is because of this trust in Kazakhstan's non-proliferation record and its leadership for decades for the cause of reducing the risks of weapons of mass destruction.
Why do you think Russia was so absent when the 600 kilograms of the destructive material were discovered?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons. It's hard to remember how chaotic the situation was after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Indeed, when we first learned about the possibility of this highly enriched uranium being present at the plant, we asked the Minister of Atomic Energy of Russia, Mikhailov, and he said, "Oh, no, there's nothing there. That's nonsense." So there are two possibilities. He was lying, which is entirely possible, or they had just forgotten about it, because the highly enriched uranium at Olba had been part of a very secret alpha submarine program in the 1980s that had then been canceled. And because of the secrecy, and all the records were on paper, this is sort of before everything was automated and digitized, it's entirely possible that they had just lost track of this. And indeed, Vice President Gore spoke with Prime Minister Chernomyrdin in April of 1994 and informed him that we were secretly working with Kazakhstan on this. And he said, "Fine, let us know if you need any help, but otherwise, you know, we have no problem with this." So we did let the Russians know about this, and I'm also certain that President Nazarbayev at the time spoke with President Yeltsin about this.
How would you assess Kazakhstan's efforts in increasing regional security, in particular establishing nuclear weapon-free Central Asia? And what's the stance of the United States on that?
Yes, so Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and other countries in the region established the Central Asia Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone, which doesn't allow for the deployment of nuclear weapons on these territories. And it's approved by the UN. It makes the whole region safer. You know, unfortunately, you have Russia to the north with thousands of nuclear weapons, and China is expanding its nuclear weapons capacity. But at least you have this, you know, peaceful area in Central Asia where there are no nuclear weapons and no risk of nuclear weapons.
Let's talk about Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, which experienced over 450 tests. Russia, Kazakhstan, United States did a tremendous job to eliminate military nuclear infrastructure. However, the consequences for the population, for the environment are still there. In your opinion, what measures can be taken to address them? And what are the prospects for Kazakhstan's initiative to establish an international fund that will assist victims of nuclear testing?
Well, the humanitarian consequences of the Soviet nuclear weapons testing at the Semipalatinsk test site is just hideous. And I support the creation of a fund to deal with these, you know, multi-generational consequences. So many people who live nearby were affected, and they have deformities and cancers, and the effects will last for many generations. So dealing with the health effects, the environmental impacts, I mean, there are parts of that test site that are off limits and will remain off limits forever. Because they're so contaminated. And so there's the environmental and humanitarian impacts which are horrible, and we have to continue to support efforts to deal with them, and many countries have participated in this effort. But there was also a proliferation risk, which isn't as well known. But we worked secretly with Kazakhstan and the Russian Federation for 17 years to deal with plutonium and highly enriched uranium that were left from some of the experiments inside the Deglan Mountain massif in the tunnels, for underground nuclear weapons tests. These were tests that they did that didn't have a full nuclear explosion. These were experiments on the metal and safety tests and different kinds of tests that left significant amounts of plutonium and highly enriched uranium behind. And of course, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when metal scavengers were going into these tunnels, we became concerned that terrorist groups could access these materials, through the scavengers. So we started a very long effort first to seal the tunnels, to make sure they wouldn't be used again for nuclear weapons tests. And that was the first decree of President Nazarbayev, was to close the nuclear weapons testing, to end the nuclear weapons testing at Semipalatinsk in newly independent Kazakhstan. So we had this program of cooperation where the Russians weapons testers who did the tests would inform the United States of the details between two nuclear weapons states, and then we would work with the government of Kazakhstan to develop projects to secure the materials in place, to make sure they couldn't be recovered by terrorists, to move some of the material to Russia for storage. It was an amazing effort, and that was announced at the Seoul 2012 Nuclear Security Summit by President Nazarbayev, Medvedev, and Obama.
What a time it had been, right? When you
It makes me sad. There were so many accomplishments that were done together, including with Russia, and the Nunn Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which I spent much of my professional life working on. Most of the effort was in Russia.
And my last question would be about Kazakhstan's initiative to establish an international agency for biological safety. With recent pandemic, why does the world still lack such an agency?
It's incredible, isn't it? I think we have the Biological Weapons Convention. It has a very small, actually 4-person implementation support unit. That's not sufficient. So President Tokayev's proposal to create an international agency for biological safety, I think it's a brilliant initiative. It's ambitious with the geopolitical situation now, with Putin's reckless, unprovoked attack on Ukraine. The worst land war in Europe since
World War II.
World War II. It's a difficult time for the United Nations to do anything new and big, but the Kazakhstan government continues to push this. It's becoming more well known. I believe the General Assembly is going to address this issue this year. So I think it does have good prospects over time. It probably has to start small. There's the funding aspect. But eventually I think it can become a reality. And this is a wonderful opportunity to have a member state of the United Nations at the head of state level present the international community with this brilliant concept. I think is fantastic.
Maybe I will ask you another question about Oppenheimer. It was a very big hit last year, and it's still buzzing after the Oscars triumph of that film. What did you think of the movie, and how do you think it did it have any impact on today's climate of, again, as I asked you before, about nuclear rhetoric, that it's becoming more frequent?
I think the Oppenheimer movie was just brilliant. I mean, I loved the movie. It affected me deeply. It was very, very powerful. I actually cried at the end. I cried because I felt so privileged that I've been able to work in my lifetime on trying to lessen these nuclear dangers, and I continue to work on this with the Council on Strategic Risks. Nuclear weapons are back. President Putin has been just recklessly threatening to use nuclear weapons. This idea of tactical nuclear weapons, battlefield nuclear weapons, a limited nuclear war, it's very, very, very dangerous. We don't need something called tactical nuclear weapons. This is a bad idea. The world has been moving away from that, and now it seems to be undergoing some kind of a renaissance. So we at the Council on Strategic Risks have released a report on tactical nuclear weapons, have written a proposal to begin to cap and eliminate tactical nuclear weapons, because these are the ones that are most likely to be used. And we haven't used nuclear weapons for about 75 years. And any use of nuclear weapons would be catastrophic for the planet. So I think the way to reduce that threat is to work internationally to eliminate this class of nuclear weapons that France doesn't have, the United Kingdom doesn't have, China doesn't have. Russia has thousands of these battlefield nuclear weapons, and they're threatening to use them. So we need to step back and focus our efforts, and Kazakhstan is currently chair of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty negotiations. I think they should make this part of the agenda. Secretary General of the United Nations, Gutierrez, has come out very strongly against tactical nuclear weapons. And I think it's an opportunity to refocus, redouble our efforts. Also, you mentioned the Oppenheimer movie. There's a new series from Netflix called Turning Point: The Bomb in the Cold War. And it presents this entire history from Oppenheimer all the way to present-day Ukraine, including in one of the episodes, it highlights Project Sapphire, this project that I was involved with as a young man, serving in Almaty for the United States government, that we did together with Kazakhstan.
I watched that Netflix series. Thank you very much for that, for this very informative, very engaging conversation. And I hope you enjoy your stay in Kazakhstan.
Well, thank you, Ida, and I'm so happy to be back in Kazakhstan. I just love this country. Thank you.